I'm Ryan MacDonald. I'm an exoplanet atmosphere theorist and astronomer based at Cornell University. And I'm pleased today to be introducing a new series of weekly videos coming to you live every Sunday, focused on Mars, human spaceflight, the challenges that we will have to overcome to send people not just to visit, but to eventually live on other planets and bodies in our own solar system. So if you've been here on the Martian Colonist YouTube channel for a while now, you'll know that my most frequent series, as infrequent as it is the Mars Mission Update series, which I tend to release a couple times every year, summarizing almost documentary style what the current state of the art is in terms of sending people to visit and live on Mars. The last one of which I released in December. So firstly, I just want to assure you that this new series, the Mars Bunker series, is supplementary to my traditional series, which will still be continuing. And I will hope to have a new Mars mission update out for you, maybe by the end of, within the next month or so. We'll see how it goes. We all have plenty of time on our hands, of course, now. So the inspiration for this Mars Bunker series is principally about the psychological effects on the human mind of long-term isolation as would be experienced on any mission to deep space. And in many ways, it's like we're all on our own missions at the moment. If you're anything like myself, I've been under lockdown at home since Tuesday of last week. And potentially, given the current situation in the world, many of us could be experiencing lockdown conditions until July, August or so, which is not that far off how long it would take to reach the red planet on a mission, which tends to take between 6 to 9 months if you use a standard Hoffman transfer orbit. But if you're a little bit more inefficient with your fuel usage and you want to get there a bit quicker, you might be able to cut it down to 3 months or so. So what I want to do with this series is partly to document psychologically what the impact on me is of experiencing these long-term isolation conditions, but also to always loop you into this to see how you, and also guests that I'm hoping to invite every week on to this show, are coping with the isolated environment and what the lessons are that we can learn for missions to Mars. So we won't just be looking at isolation, we will be doing, general Q&A sessions all throughout this. So hello there to all of you around the world. So why don't you just let me know, where are you watching in from the world at the moment? Because we have some exciting new features in this new live streaming software that I'm using. So, for example, let's grab one of you up. Hello there, Andrew Knoll from the Buffalo area in New York. How are you doing today? I see that there are many of you who are watching from other YouTube channels. So in particular, I'm very grateful to have part of the crew from the What About It YouTube channel moderating today. Thank you very much, Felix and everyone, for joining here. Yep, hello there, Felix from Germany. Hello, Mikko in Finland. Hello, Hold My ARK from Southern California. Great to see all of you today. Okay, so without further ado, the topic that I want to discuss for the first live stream is something called isolation shock. So to put this into context, imagine that you have just departed from Earth orbit on a mission to Mars. Within a very short period of time, within a week, 2 weeks or so, you are already further out than any human has ever gone before. Even for the astronauts in the era of Apollo, they could always still see the Earth, unless, of course, the moon was in the way. You could resolve our home planet as a clear disk. But people going to Mars will reach this interesting psychological stage where they're far enough away from Earth that they can't see the disk of the Earth. They can only see a pale blue dot. But equally, they can't see their destination, Mars. And so you're trapped in a situation where all that there is surrounding you is the blackness of space. And that situation will likely be very shocking for many people, even if you've trained for it for many years as part of an astronaut training and selection process. And so there's interesting parallels here between the isolation conditions that we're all experiencing now. Because for many of us, even if you've been following the news, it's come as a bit of a shock. There may have been weeks or days of notice, But for many people, that's it. It has felt like life itself, as we know it at least, has ground to a halt, with many of us having to stay indoors. And so I'm curious about the parallels between the shock of suddenly realizing that you can't do things in your day-to-day life that you used to do, and how that would be true for astronauts on a mission to Mars, who suddenly come to the realization that there's no going back once you're on that transfer orbit. You can't see where you came from, you can't see where you're going to. And so the closest we have at the moment for astronaut experiences of such isolation is probably from astronauts on the International Space Station, who are commonly asked questions like, what is it that you miss most from life on Earth? And interestingly, a lot of those answers tend to be more subtle things. So for example, the sound of waves on the beach, or the sensation of wind going through your hair, which I'm already acclimatized to not experiencing, so I guess I'm already ready to go to Mars. Okay, so what I want to ask you now is, and let's test out this new technology. So since many of you have started experiencing isolation, what has surprised you the most? Or what are the things that you suddenly realize that you are starting to miss? And to illustrate this in my own situation, so I say I've been in isolation since Tuesday. We are trying to still carry out our research to the greatest extent possible. We have regular Zoom meetings with other scientists and researchers in our department to try and maintain as much of a sense of normalcy as possible. I mean, I'm fortunate because I'm a theorist. All I really need is an internet connection, a computer, pen and paper to do some derivations, and I can get most of my work done. But then, I mean, it's a big distraction seeing the state of the world at the moment, and it's very hard psychologically to focus on other things when you see. It's easy to think, why does it matter looking at this particular planet around star X when, you know, people are getting ill all around the world? So let's take a look at what you were thinking. What has surprised you most about isolation? And let's take a look at some comments. So, okay, another Glenn, you're missing your beer. Well, I mean, in many countries, like in the UK on Friday, pubs were closed. So there are a lot of people that are learning to do without. On early missions to Mars, this would also be the case, but I'm sure it wouldn't take long until we have someone figuring out how to use the hydroponics bay to grow simple things that can be fermented and distilled. So you might have to do without your beer on the way to Mars, but once you're there, maybe you'll be able to try some. Okay, so what else? What other surprises are you all experiencing? So a comment from Andres. So it's how much every day you want and how little you actually need. So yeah, it's interesting reflecting on this actually, in that once you're in a situation where you no longer have the choice of experiencing many things, you can realize that there's a lot of things that we take for granted in day-to-day life that we don't actually need, that we can function without. So for many of us, I'm sure you're experiencing that. Hello there, Miguel. So I'm sure for many of you, you're experiencing that it's much harder to get things like fresh food, for example, which would certainly be a condition that you would experience on the way to Mars. While there are experiments going on board the International Space Station at the moment in growing lettuce and salads, for example, and you would hope to be able to do that on Mars, the astronauts have certainly had to come to terms with not having a ready supply of fresh food and having those, bags that you effectively heat in a microwave module on board the International Space Station. So we know that people for long duration space missions can live without this, but there'll still be a psychological toll. Okay, so let's take another comment. Okay, Warhawk. So what surprised you the most was that the paper aisle at the store was empty, and you would have thought that preserved food would have gone first. Yeah, this is a big surprise because, I mean, at the end of the day, for most of human history, people were fine without toilet paper, but you need food to be able to survive. So food like that can last for a long period of time, like, pasta and rice and things, you'd expect to have gone out of store first. So actually, on the topic of food, I have a recommendation for you that might be helpful for some of you, and is an experiment that I'm going to be trying to increase the realism of the isolation that I'm in for a mission to Mars. So what I have, a large part of my diet is going to be consisting of various so-called complete foods, which are like powdered food supplements. Soylent's one brand that you might have heard of, for example, but there are loads of other companies depending on where you're living in the world. Like Huel is one that's based in the UK that does these, they're called ready-to-drink complete foods. So they already have the water included. Soylent, you just add water, shake it, and then drink it pretty much. And you can pretty much live off this stuff. Like they've been on the market for more than 5 years now. And so a large part of my diet is going to be this. And so we'll see how I do with that. But also this stuff is cheap, and this powders can last, officially they last for a year, but they can last for 5 years or so, pretty much, if you store them in a dry place. I'm not expecting this crisis to go on for 5 years, but I thought it'd be fun to try this as an experiment. And just in case you're having difficulties at home, like you can't find fresh food at the supermarket, you can order all these kind of things online. Like depending on what country you are, like if you're in Europe, you could get, there's a company called Jimmy Joy based in the Netherlands that used to be called Joylent. There's Saturo based in Austria. There's Y-Food based in Germany. Those are ones that I've tried myself and are pretty good. There are also brands like in Australia, I think there's one called Oscillent. So that there are lots of these going around the place. And so I hope things won't get bad enough. But if you yourself are worried about food security, you can easily order these things online. So, okay. Yes, I do indeed read your YouTube comments. So keep them coming in all throughout. So I'm just scrolling through all of your comments now to see. Okay, so this from Linda. You'd love to be able to paint scenes on smooth Mars stones to ship back to Earth for sale at auctions to support the Mars colony. So my personal suspicion is that the biggest export from Mars will probably be ideas. It won't be economically viable for a long time to, you know, either mine materials or paint rocks, as you say, and then ship them back to Earth due to, you know, the cost of launching things off Mars. But an idea or, say, intellectual property for more efficient recycling systems, you can beam those back to Earth at the speed of light with minimal cost at all. And so that's just my suspicion. I'd be curious to hear what you think would be most effective for being, you know, self-sufficient for a Mars colony. And going back to the topic of food for Mars, one thing I'm very keen to do, maybe not for next week, but for future episodes, is that there are a couple of people that I know that are experts on growing food in space and sustainability, and have also conducted research on how you could potentially grow food in Martian soil simulants. And so, although in this first episode, it's just you and me, in the more regular episodes there'll be guests coming on board and joining me in the studio. And indeed, I would hope that for some future episodes, maybe one or more of you could join me. If you do want to share your own experiences of what it's like in isolation and what you think this could mean for missions to Mars, perhaps one of the easiest way is just to tweet away on #MarsBunker. And you can, of course, leave comments on this YouTube video after we are no longer live. So, an interesting question from Rourke here, who makes pottery and wants to know if Martian regolith could be used for it. So, I've seen that there are some people that have been studying how you could effectively make Martian bricks by using microwaves to effectively, you know, bake out the water from Martian regolith and make this kind of thick paste that can be used. So, I've not seen any particular studies focused on pottery for this, but I imagine that you would be able to use it for those applications. There'll be plenty of hobbies on Mars, for sure. Okay, and going back to my earlier question from James here, joints okay, but it could be boring after a while. So yeah, I am going to be supplementing a little bit of my diet in the early stage with, you know, normal human foods. So I've still got, you know, bread and things in the house for now. Although as part of this experiment, I am planning not to leave the house, at least for the next week, so that I can tell you by next week's episode, you know, how that made me feel and how I'm dealing with it psychologically, but perhaps longer than that. And so I've only gone out of the house 2 times in the last week just to get some supplies, and so I'm good for the next few weeks. So variety is good. Variety is good. Okay, a question from another space nut. Is a vegan diet the best plan for Mars? So the concepts of Mars missions that I've seen would be almost entirely vegetarian, but they tend to be supplemented somewhat by, for example, a meat supply from insect protein. That's partly motivated by efficiency, because we can't ingest, all the parts of every plant that you might be growing in your hydroponic greenhouse yourself. And so having an insect farm like crickets and grasshoppers, etc., digesting the plant protein that we can't ingest could serve as a valuable supply. That being said, I'm sure there will be people that go to Mars who'll be vegan. And these various powders and things, like, I don't think Soylent is vegan. I think that's vegetarian, but Huel is vegan. So if you want to join me in that experiment and you're a vegan, you can certainly do that. Okay, let's see what other questions you have. Yes, there are indeed clay deposits on Mars, which we could use potentially for pottery. Okay, here's an interesting question from the Being of Wrath. I wonder if in simulated Earth-like conditions would fruit and trees grow differently on Mars? So yeah, this is a really interesting point. So there are, of course, experiments on the space station that have been growing plants in the microgravity environment up there. I say microgravity instead of 0G because the Earth isn't perfectly spherical. And so even though you're in free fall, there's little distortions in the gravitational field at about the level of 1/1,000,000th of Earth's surface gravity. But that micro-G is enough for plants to use their roots and kind of grow towards the Earth. So it seems that plants are reasonably adaptable to different gravitational field strengths. And on Mars, you're 38% of Earth's gravity. So I don't think there would be problems from the gravity. But of course, if you were growing, you wouldn't be able to grow plants immediately outside. There aren't the right nutrients in the Martian soil. There are also toxic chemicals like perchlorates in some of the soil that you'd have to clean out first. You'd want to do it hydroponically inside first, and there probably wouldn't be any issues with the gravitational field. So yes, there'd probably be some differences. Maybe trees would grow taller, but a lot of this is speculative because ultimately we don't have much data. In fact, I'm not aware of almost any experiments in growing plants in, like in a centrifuge that's simulating Martian gravity. That'd be very interesting to see. Okay, what have you got next? And yeah, I see your other point. Crickets and grasshoppers. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those to try and make my Martian experiment more realistic. Yeah, tarantulas could also work. But I know for one that if I was trapped in a base on Mars, the last thing I'd want is to have some tarantulas which would escape and be running all around the base. So no thank you with tarantulas on Mars. Okay. So this from my good friend Miguel. Okay, if you were offered the chance to go to the moon for sure, but only if you give up on any chance to go to Mars, would you do it? In my case, no. The moon is an interesting place for heavy industry and scientific research. There are researchers in the Carl Sagan Institute where I work looking at things like radio detection from exoplanets, which would be amazingly enhanced if you could have a large radio array on the far side of the moon, for example. There are amazing applications for what we could do upon the moon, but I don't think it's a place to live. There aren't all of the resources that you need locally there to be self-sufficient. Mars has almost everything you need. The only real thing is there's a deficiency of nitrogen, which would be something you'd have to worry about if you were eventually terraforming Mars or for creating nitrates for nutrients in the soil, for example. But in terms of, building materials, water, being able to make your own breathable air, Mars has all of that. So, no, I don't think that my channel is Martian Colonist, not Lunar Colonist. But I'm sure there are some of you. I have some friends who would love to go to the moon, but Mars is a little bit too far away. Okay. Oh, here's a great question. When do you think the first Martian Olympics will be held? This is very interesting because there are going to be so many unique sports that you would be able to do on Mars due to not just the reduced gravity, but also the different atmospheric pressure. So to give you an idea of one that I've thought about, imagine that you take a kind of like a a film, like a skateboard or something, and coat the underside in dry ice, frozen carbon dioxide. So at the temperature of Mars, dry ice, which freezes around -70 or so in Celsius, in many regions is very close to subliming or turning into CO2 gas. So it turns out that if you just step onto one of these boards, the increase in pressure at the bottom of the board is enough to transform some of the CO2 ice into CO2 gas and effectively make a low-tech hoverboard. So imagine, skimming down one of the Martian dunes on one of these, for example. Like the physics and chemistry being different on Mars just due to these local conditions is going to have some fascinating applications. Imagine high jump in, 3/8 of Earth's gravity. So as to your question, though, when could it be held? It'll probably depend a little bit on the population on Mars. So there'll probably be low-scale sporting events, by the time you've got 50 to 100 people, but it's probably more, 1,000 plus before you get, full-scale organized Olympics. And I would love if we had, transplanetary competitions where people from Earth come to Mars. They'd have to go through a training period because it wouldn't be fair with the Martians already being used to the reduced gravity. I'm sure there'll be all manner of opportunities for this. A question from John Randolph. Will some of your transport habitats stay in orbit, or will everything land on Mars? This depends a little bit on the Mars mission architecture that you are pursuing. If you have something like SpaceX's Starship, the entire vehicle is landing on Mars. There are other companies like Lockheed Martin has been considering an architecture called Mars Base Camp that would effectively build a station orbiting around Mars and have little, transfer shuttlecrafts going up and down from the surface back up to this base. So either architecture could work. My personal view is if you want to go to the surface of Mars, just go there. I say that, there are a number of technical justifications for that, but mostly it's just far more expensive to build a full orbiting outpost around Mars. The International Space Station cost around $100 billion to build. Not all at once, thankfully, over a very long period of time. But if you have the technology to, land 100 people on Mars in one go, just go ahead, skip the orbital stage and do that. And you can always build the orbital architecture later. You can always explore the Martian moons, Phobos and Deimos. So my personal view would be just go to the surface of Mars when you have the capability. But as I say, there are people considering the alternatives. Okay. And here's another good point. Lunar dust is like walking in a desert of broken glass. That is also true to a certain extent on Mars. The Martian regolith can also be a little bit sharp. The difference being that because Mars has an atmosphere, that can erode the structure of some of these fine-grained particles, so they're not as sharp as lunar regolith. And these particles are really small. In my master's project at Oxford, where I was working on studying designs for a potential sample return mission to the moons of Mars. As part of my project, I had to make a Mars regolith simulant. And that sounds fancy, but it was effectively mortar and pestle, taking a rock of like phyllosilicates and similar things to what you have on Mars, and manually grinding it down for 2 days to get the average particle size down from this to about 1 micrometer, or 10 to the minus 6 meters. So Martian regolith is very small, but and don't breathe it in. It's got its own toxic properties. But yeah, it's not quite as sharp as lunar regolith. Okay, here's another great point. What do you think of the mini Starship idea that Dr. Robert Zubrin suggested as a way to tackle the moon issue? So I still need to do more reading and become slightly better versed in specifically what he's proposing. I've just read kind of Zubrin's op-eds on the subject, not his technical papers. I think there are some merits to the idea, but as it stands, it looks like SpaceX are making very rapid progress, and that, also rapid destructive process with their various prototypes. But I would be inclined just to see how they go with their current design that SpaceX has of, the full 100-person Starship system. And then you can always study, having, a smaller mini Starship to go inside of its payload bay, for example. So yeah, I think you should only downscope if it becomes clearly necessary that there's a strong reason to do that, and not just for the sake of it. It would probably actually add to the development cycle. And it's hard to make plans like that when the Starship system is rapidly going through iterations, almost on a weekly and daily basis. Okay, a question from Girton. What are my thoughts on a Venusian cloud city? So this is absolutely something that we should do. So the context for this is at about 50 kilometers above the surface of Venus. Don't go to the surface of Venus. It's not a pleasant place. It'll melt lead. You'll get crushed. You'll be set on fire. And there's sulfuric acid rain. But 50 kilometers above the surface, the pressure and temperature are actually very comparable to the surface conditions on the Earth. You still have to contend with, sulfuric acid clouds and the like. But the idea of having floating cities on Venus for research and also settlement is a fantastic idea. It's just, it's a pity that there isn't more active research going into this. And I know many researchers that are constantly frustrated about how difficult it is to get scientific missions going to Venus. When, this year before, the whole coronavirus situation, there was supposed to be 4 missions going to Mars in the launch window. Mars 2020, or Perseverance, still looks like it's going ahead. The ExoMars Rosalind Franklin rover has been pushed back to the next launch window, and I don't know where where China and the UAE's mission stand at the moment, but some of those will likely get pushed back. So that's just to say we need to send more scientific survey missions to Venus to better understand the atmospheric composition, its variability with time, and all the conditions that you would need to be able to engineer a Venus cloud city first. So I'm sure we'll do it eventually, but I think we'll have Mars colonies for quite some time before we have the necessary skills and knowledge to build these things. Question here from David Webb. People born on Mars could never travel to Earth. Earth germs would kill them. This is a very good point. I would also say that the difference in the gravitational field is also worth a matter of concern, because imagine you've been born on Mars. Your average bone cross-section and muscle density will be much weaker than what you have growing in a higher gravity environment on Earth. If you then travel from Mars to Earth, you've then got 6 months of pretty much 0G. Your muscles and bones get even weaker, and then during re-entry, you can be exposed to 4 or 5G. That could be enough to shatter the bones of people that are born on Mars if they're sufficiently thin. So it might be possible. Obviously, if you had an exoskeleton supporting you, sure, but that's a very interesting point that we'll have to consider. It comes up a lot actually in analyzing the structure of societies on Earth and Mars. Because one thing to consider is whether you would get a 2-tier interplanetary society where people born on Earth can live on Earth or Mars, but people born on Mars can only live on one planet. And although it would be some time until Terrans and Martians are a different species biologically speaking, sociologically speaking, that could come about from the first generation or two. So let's see, what other comments do we have? And thank you, by the way, for sending all of these in. Okay. So this from Rick Strickland. SpaceX is focusing on providing transportation to Mars. Has there been pickup by others to support the rest of what is needed to live on Mars? So this is great. So the closest that I know of would be NASA's 3D printed Mars Habitat Challenge. I spoke a little bit about the final of this in one of my last 2 Mars mission updates. So there are various corporations around the world, like architectural firms and 3D printing organizations from university teams that got together under the direction of NASA to study properties of potential bases that you could print on the surface of Mars using local resources. So please check out, I think it was my October Mars mission update from last year that I covered the Hazel Corporation's plan for that. So yeah, there is some work going on innovative habitat design, but there is a lot more work that needs to be done on things like fully self-sufficient life support systems on Mars. And perhaps that's a topic that we can discuss in a future Mars bunker. Maybe I could try and get on an expert who is, got experience on life support systems here on Earth, so we can actually discuss all of the remaining challenges. Because getting to Mars is the first step, but there's a lot of stuff that you need to be able to understand to be able to survive there. Wow, there's a lot of comments coming in. Okay. You'd love to see the day when we can go further out than Voyager 1. As would I, because of course, my own research is focused on exoplanets, and I would love to be able to send a probe to an exoplanet one day, hopefully during my own life. There are various things being proposed, like the Breakthrough Starshot Initiative, and in fact, one mission that we would really love to see is the solar gravitational lens, which would send out a series of telescopes out to 500 astronomical units, so more than 10 times further away than Pluto is, to reach a gravitational sweet spot where the gravitational field of the sun is sufficiently strong to bend rays of light coming from other stars to create a gravitational lens, and you can use that to directly image exoplanets with surface resolution. So you could see continents and rivers, for example. And so there are many incredible applications that we can do without even having to go all the way to other stars, if we can just go out a little bit further than missions like Voyager 1 have gone. And yeah, here's a good question. How does the current situation influence the launch of missions planned to Mars this year? From what I've heard, Perseverance, or Mars 2020, is the top priority of NASA at the moment. They're still pushing ahead, planning for the launch as usual, with other projects put on standby. For example, this affects astronomers like myself, because the James Webb Space Telescope, construction and testing of that has been paused due to the current situation around the world. And so launch for that, which was planned for March of 2021, so next year, will be delayed, and we ultimately don't know how long until we have a better idea of how long this situation will last for. So many missions across NASA are being affected by not being able to have all their engineering workforces working on these missions. But for the time being, Mars 2020 is still a go. And as I said, I don't know about the UAE's mission and to Mars at the moment, and China's mission. So we'll have to keep an eye out for those. So this from B, and hello there from Belgium. Okay, Elon Musk wants Starship to launch and land 3 times a day or so. Do you think he wants to build something in orbit, a station, or a bigger ship? So if you wanted to build something large in orbit, the kind of experience you would get from the docking of starships required to refuel them for missions to Mars would provide valuable experience for that. And obviously, given the huge, 9-meter payload bay of Starship, it'd be very easy to launch, say, large inflatable habitats into orbit. I'm particularly excited by the prospect of being able to launch space telescopes, potentially a successor to James Webb, like the LUVOIR mission, into space. And so Starship, or maybe even potentially in the future, a super large version of Starship, perhaps 12 meters or larger, would be ideal for us launching large space telescopes that we don't have to unfold. So I definitely think there's the potential to use the Starship system to build things in orbit. Okay. Question from Big Rat Killer. What do you think the main source of power will be on Mars? Solar, nuclear, methane, oxygen, etc. It'll probably be solar power. So there are all manner of issues on the technology side associated with sending a nuclear reactor into space or to Mars. There's a lot more development that would have to be done there, even if in the long term, a nuclear reactor might be the best way to go. If you just want something that's cheap, that we have the technology to do already, and is reasonably reliable, solar panels would be the way to go. So because Mars is 1.52 astronomical units, 1 divided by that squared gives you 40% of the intensity of the sun at Earth's surface is what you experience at Mars's surface. So solar power is still a pretty good option on the surface of Mars. And as you mentioned, combustion engines might work. There would be a lot of, distilling of fuels and fuel refineries taking place anyway, just to create the fuel that you would need for, say, like the Starship's Raptor engines to return to the Earth, or to go further out in the asteroid belt or elsewhere in the solar system. So perhaps if you had leftover methane and oxygen, then you could indeed use that. Okay, the influence that Patrick Moore had me on a child. Yeah, I also loved seeing the sky at night. I mean, obviously, I'm reasonably young. I'm 26, and so I didn't see that much of him before he unfortunately passed away. And so for me, big inspiration were figures like, watching Cosmos that Carl Sagan produced, and Brian Cox in particular in the UK, who's like, our version of Neil deGrasse Tyson, was very inspirational for me when I was growing up and in school, studying physics, for example. So, science communication is a vitally important area to inspire people. And space is one of those areas where, everyone can connect to space. You don't need to have degrees in astronomy or astrophysics to be able to appreciate how wonderful and mysterious things are elsewhere in the cosmos. And so it's the ideal hook to get people going into science. So I'm certainly grateful for the efforts of people like Sir Patrick Moore on The Sky at Night. I often think about this when I go into schools and give talks, for example, that if, half an hour of my time can inspire even one kid to want to study space or to consider being a scientist, that more than makes it worth doing this thing. So outreach is a crucial aspect of it. Inspired me, and I want to help pass that on to as many young people in particular as possible. And Cosmos favorite series, and don't forget, there's a new series of Cosmos on at the moment, and also another reason why I haven't produced many videos since December is because I've been working on kickstarting the Carl Sagan Institute's YouTube channel where I work. We've already had one video out that I produced on the anniversary of the 30th anniversary of the pale blue dot photo that corresponds to, Carl Sagan's truly inspirational poetic quote. But we've got a lot more content coming out on that channel as well. So by all means, check out the Carl Sagan Institute channel. You'll see me there every now and then for videos, interviews, live streams, etc. I'm trying to kind of partition so that this channel is mostly focused on humans to Mars and, the science of Mars, the challenges of human spaceflight. And on the Carl Sagan Institute channel, it's focused mainly on the search for alien life elsewhere in the universe. But there could be some good overlap in searches for life on Mars, for example. So please check out the Carl Sagan Institute channel as well. We will be producing some videos on the science of cosmos there. So there'll be some cool content you'll see there soon. Question from Mikko. Should NASA fast-track development of nuclear engines for interplanetary travel, and how much could these shorten the time? So I'm absolutely in favor of this. Shorter journey times to Mars, potentially on the order of 40 days is what you might be able to do. I mean, for years, people have been talking about this engine type called Vasimir that is kind of like a plasma-based engine that might be able to do this. I mean, I've wanted for a really long time to make a detailed video on different propulsion techniques that you could use to get to Mars, like comparing chemical, nuclear, ion drives, all of these different types of engines. So thank you for reminding me. I should definitely make that video. And so one thing I should say, and if you've been watching for a while, you'll know that I've been teasing for a while that I want to make a Discord channel for the Martian Colonist YouTube channel to coordinate research and planning for future videos. And so if that's something you're interested in, if you'd like to be, a part of planning these videos, and the less time I have to spend doing, all the background research, the more content I will be able to produce for you all. I haven't launched that channel yet, but I'm going to try and do that within the next week. I know I'm behind. And also, if you have any guests in mind that you would like to join future Mars Bunkers, if you could reach out to them, put them in contact with me, that would be fantastic. I mean, my dream would be to have people like Robert Zubrin join, for example, to discuss things like the mini starship that you discussed. But we want to build up the audience a little bit and establish what these Mars bunkers are actually like, given that it's an interesting experiment for me with this regular format. I'm also hoping to bring other YouTubers on board. And so we'll see what we might be able to do for next week. So hopefully within the next week, I'll launch that Discord channel, and then I'll share the link for you in the next Mars Bunker so that you too can join and participate in the planning of these videos. And who knows, maybe you can even join as a guest as well. And thank you very much, Split Second Mum, for the link there to the Carl Sagan Institute channel. Sorry for the giant wall of text there. If you just search for CSI, Exoplanets, or Carl Sagan Institute, you should find it there. lots more content will be appearing there. Okay, so I'm probably going to stay for the next 10 minutes or so. So if you have any last burning questions that you really want me to address, by all means, please send them in. And of course, I'm really interested, going back to the original question for this stream, about what has surprised you most about isolation shock, and how are you coming to terms with it? Okay. So yeah, we have interest in life support systems. I'll definitely try and get a guest on board who's an expert to discuss this. You'd like to see me design my own Mars transport vehicle? Remember, I'm not an engineer. I'm a theorist. We're terrible at practical things. I mean, when I had the experience of writing Hubble proposals over the past 3 weeks or so, of which I was involved in about 8 or 9 of these, that was a very interesting experience for me, learning, how to write about doing something practical in the real world using a telescope to observe something. So yeah, maybe ask engineers and not theorists if you want the vehicle to be stable. I think Isaac Arthur's channel is incredible for long-form, detailed content. Yeah, he just makes phenomenal videos. And so if you haven't seen his channel, by all means, I would certainly advise you check it out. I would love it if potentially he could be a guest. I'm presuming he's not watching at the moment, but if any of you have a direct line of contact with him, please do reach out, because I would love to get kind of, in these Mars bunkers, conversations going between some of your favorite space YouTubers, so you can see us all interact. Because, I mean, it would be nice to get collaborations going where I can promote other space YouTubers' channels, and you get a chance here to have your questions answered and to see us all interact. So it'll help all of us, because, yeah, there's not competition going on YouTube for space. There's space for everyone. And yeah, I'm happy to help out any other space channel with growing their audience. We're all in this together. Okay. So yeah, isolation isn't that bad when you have cats for company. Yeah, there are my housemate here has two dogs, 2 bloodhounds. So I certainly have company with some furry friends here that perhaps we wouldn't have on a Mars mission, at least in the early days. Yes, homeschooling, I can imagine, is certainly an interesting challenge that people are facing around the world at the moment. And this would also be quite true on Mars once, the first kids are brought up there, because there'd be a huge number of skills that you would need to be able to teach children to be able to survive and function well in a Martian environment where everything on Mars is trying to kill you. It's a hostile place. And so think about that when you're practicing your homeschooling. What would be the bare minimum number of skills that you would need to teach your kids to be able to survive and function on Mars? And maybe that's a topic that we can actually cover in detail in a future Mars bunker: education on a Mars mission. Okay. This in from Jay. Have I watched The Expanse? Could it be an accurate prediction for the next 100 years? I have. The Expanse is one of my favorite science fiction programs that are on at the moment. If you haven't seen it, I think you can mainly find it on Amazon Prime. So I like The Expanse and also the book series that it's based on, because it's a good example of hard science fiction. The authors, James S. A. Corey, have tried really hard to get the science right. So when you see things like space combat, where inertia from changing your momentum vector can almost be more dangerous to you than, just bullets or railguns being fired in space. So yeah, I particularly like the sociological implications of having societies on Earth, Mars, the asteroid belt, and seeing how these different societies have developed about 200 years in the future in the Expanse universe. So I would say it's a far more realistic depiction of our future in the solar system than something like Star Trek, for example, because, well, maybe I'll talk about this more if I make a video on propulsion, but as far as we know it, there are huge difficulties on faster than light travel and warp drives. There are interesting, theoretical studies looking at how you could use negative energy and exotic particles to create a warp drive. But as far as we know, there's no clear practical routes to doing that. So assuming that we don't have the capability
to expand beyond the solar system in the next 200 years, and we build societies within, I think is a really nice feature of the Expanse universe, and I'd highly recommend you checking it out if you haven't seen the series or read the books. The series is also quite accurate to the books, which is nice to see. Do you think isolation isn't hitting many people hard because we stay constantly connected using the internet? And if that ever stopped, we would likely go crazy. I'm certainly trying to keep in touch with as many people as possible. I'm hoping that by the time we get to like week 10 or so of this Mars bunker that you won't see me gradually descending into madness. We shall see, but absolutely, the internet is really our saving grace and lifeline here during this unprecedented period in human history. But for many people, it will still be a shock coming to terms with the fact that you might not see other people for 6 months or a year or so, beyond people that are just living in your house or that you can see outside, for example. So it's probably going to take a month or two before this really starts to hit home what this is like for many people. And that's the point, if anything, where we'll really see that isolation shock that I mentioned. So another question here. Elon has said he's not sure if humans will land on Mars before he dies. How likely do I think that SpaceX will succeed with Starship? I'm reasonably confident, seeing the rapid development that's taking place, in particular down at Boca Chica. So this innovative process of destructive testing where, you build things as rapidly as you can, it fails, you innovate, you repeat, you figure out the failure, you make it better. We haven't seen anything like this since the days of Apollo. And so if it is at all within the realm of technical possibility, which indications seem to show it is, to build a stainless steel Starship or using some new alloy of steel that Elon Musk has hinted at a few times recently, to send 100 people to Mars, like, if anyone can do it, it'll be Elon Musk and the incredible team at SpaceX there. So, yeah, I don't think there'll be any... I don't think we're going to see humans not landing on Mars during Elon Musk's lifetime. So, yeah, although I just hope that people at SpaceX, keep themselves safe during this period. A lot of them are still working really hard on building the Starship system, even when many people are obviously working from home in the situation at the moment. So, yeah, I hope they all keep safe and continue however possible with the work they're doing. And if they have to pause it, then just resume it once it's safe to do that. If the internet goes down, you're pulling your hair out after 1 hour. I am already prepared for this, so nothing to worry about. I have heard that some people actually, just looking on Twitter, are concerned about, not being able to get haircuts now, for example. So you're welcome to join me. It's perfectly fine. Okay. So I am probably going to wrap up here. So just thank you all for joining me. And just a quick reminder, I'm going to try and set up a Discord channel by next week so that if you want to be involved in the production of these videos, and not just the live streams, but also in my Mars mission update series, it'd be great to have you on board there. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going to be speaking to a number of prospective people as guests for next week's show. So the general format I'm thinking will be an update on, has Ryan gone crazy yet? What life is like in isolation, bringing in the guest to discuss a particular topic. Please let me know if there's one that you'd like to discuss. At the moment, I'm thinking about growing food in deep space, self-sufficiency, sustainability, how you stay creative in isolation. There's lots of ideas, but I'm always happy to take your suggestions. So thank you all for joining me for the better part of an hour. Stay safe, everyone. If you're watching the recording, thanks for watching through all of this. Please still drop your comments down below, and I will be taking time to reply to as many of those as I can. And until next week, I will see you on Sunday in the Mars Bunker. Bye for now, everyone.